Hello, this is Tracy Creech, and I will be reviewing the Scarlet Letter from the introduction through Chapter 17, which is page 559 in our Norton text. This covers the readings through March 17th. On slide 2, we have two portraits of Nathaniel Hawthorne. One is a painting of him as a young man. On the right, we have a photograph of him from the 1860s. He was born in 1804, and he died in 1864, which is the middle of the American Civil War. He published the Scarlet Letter in 1850, which is about 11 years before the start of the American Civil War, but it's still a time of great political instability in American politics. The nation is tearing itself apart over the issue of the spread of slavery into the new territories. So we're talking about all the issues that are in the run-up to the American Civil War, a very polarized and difficult time in American political life. Hawthorne is associated with Romanticism, which is a very important cultural movement both in America and in Europe, especially Britain, France, and Germany. And Romanticism is often seen as a reaction against the ideals of the Enlightenment. Our Enlightenment neoclassical writers like Franklin and Equiano were very idealistic about the possibilities of human rationality and reason, and it's very objective in its style. It has a lot of faith in sincerity and truth and the ability of human beings to be truthful and to come to good decisions. The idea is if a person is educated and intelligent, then they can make good decisions about the world and about their own lives, and it's very optimistic about democracy, for example, because it trusts people to be reasonable and rational and make good decisions about who their leaders are, as opposed to just accepting whatever monarch is given to them to make decisions for them. So we can see how those Enlightenment ideals would lead to the Age of Revolution, which again, revolutions were like the American Revolution and the French Revolution were quite idealistic in the beginning, again based on the idea that the common man had the potential and the power to govern himself, to make good decisions about his own governance. But especially with the French Revolution, that dragged on for a few decades, and so those ideals began to be seen once you had war for a couple of decades and you had people going from being interested in democracy to really just making power grabs. You got a lot of disappointment by the 1800s in those Enlightenment ideals, and so you move from this kind of objective stance to a more subjective stance. People start becoming more interested in in inner psychological states, as a thinking less about the rational brain and more about the human heart, human emotion, human psychology. Also interested in things like creativity and nature. And so Romanticism is interested in all of those things. And dark Romanticism is also associated with Hawthorne. Really all that is just the darker side of Romanticism, the darker side of human psychology, the darker side of human emotion. So, you might get people who are preoccupied, writers who are preoccupied with obsession or insanity, things of that nature, even horror. Poe would be another dark romanticist, and another word for this is as Gothic writing. So Poe and Hawthorne, will write in these Gothic modes where they're interested, if not the supernatural, then at least this kind of psychological thriller that we get. And certainly the Scarlet Letter is kind of doom and gloom. It's certainly dark at any rate, and so we get that kind of Gothic style even here. Hawthorne's also associated with Transcendentalism, which is more more associated with people like Emerson and Thoreau. These are people who are very interested in nature, very interested in the spirituality of nature. And we won't talk too much about Transcendentalism here, but Hawthorne did know Emerson, and he was Emerson's friend, and so he is associated with that movement. In slide 3, we have a photograph of the actual custom house in Salem, Massachusetts, where Hawthorne worked, and which he describes in great detail in his introduction to the Scarlet Letter called The Custom House. Um, this is a semi-autobiographical sketch. It is based on real events. He did work in this place. The people he talks about were real people, and that made it controversial at the time because he's talking about real people and he's kind of critical about them, if you noticed. He talks about how lazy they are. He talks about how they got their jobs for no good reason. They're not very good at it. They don't need to be very good at it. They're fairly corrupt. I mean, he doesn't seem like he's coming down too hard on them. He seems maybe even affectionate toward them, but he is criticizing them at the same time. He also talks about, his own boredom there, how it crushes his creativity as an author. And yet, for all those negative attitudes toward his working there, he is apparently very bitter about the circumstances of his firing, which occurred basically because Hawthorne was a Democrat, and this was a government job, and he was, hired during a Democratic presidency. And then in 1848, after a couple of years of working there, there's a new president elected, Zachary Taylor, who's from the opposing party, the Whig Party, WHIG. And, once there's a new administration, they throw out people from government jobs who are of the opposing party because they want to put in their own people. So Hawthorne, through no fault of his own, is thrown out of his job, and this is, again, he's very upset about it, and he has now written something that is published widely, and it causes a big stink in the media. He also takes quite a bit of time in this introduction talking about his family's history in Salem. And it's interesting because, again, he doesn't talk about Salem in a way that seems like he's very proud of it. He talks about how he has this deep connection to Salem, and that he has a kind of a birthright. It's his native land. His ancestors are buried there. Their bones are under the ground that he walks on. So he is deeply connected to it, not because he loves it, not because he's made some rational decision to be there, but it's almost like some kind of compulsion through his blood that he must be there. So again, this is where we're really seeing this romantic mode in Hawthorne, or at least part of it. He's not there because he made some conscious decision to be there because he likes it. It's because he has ancestors. It's because of his bloodline. He has a birthright to this place, and it doesn't matter if he likes it or not. This is just the place that he's tied to on this kind of very visceral level. Here on slide 4, we have a painting called The Trial of George Jacobs from 1692. It was actually painted in 1855, but it is referring to the Salem witch trials, which occurred in 1692 to 93. This, of course, was before, this was when Salem, Massachusetts was still, a British colony, and this was a Puritan community, and 20 people were executed as a result of being convicted of witchcraft. In this particular painting in the lower right, we have the actual George Jacobs, and he is being, many of the women in the courtroom are pointing at him, accusing him of witchcraft. And if you look toward the back of the room, in the center, you'll see a gentleman standing up. He's in a black robe with a white collar, and his left hand is holding a book toward a woman who is accusing George Jacobs. That man represents Judge John Hathorne, who is Nathaniel Hawthorne's patrilineal ancestor. It's not a misspelling. The Hawthorne family ended up adding the W to their name, but Judge Hathorne was partly responsible for sending these people to their deaths. And Hawthorne talks about, he admits this ancestor, and he's not proud of it. It is considered an embarrassing time in American history, a time of mass hysteria, and also a time of, people basically trying to extract payback. Petty grudges were met with these, accusing your neighbor of witchcraft in order to, pay them back for some perceived wrong. So it is, a pretty upsetting time, and Hawthorne admits this. And yet, again, we have this romanticist move he's making where, again, he doesn't have to like this ancestor or approve this ancestor, and yet, because this ancestor is so important to American history and to Salem's history, Hawthorne is claiming quite strongly this connection to Hawthorne, based on the fact that this is part of his inheritance, his blood inheritance, his blood right to Salem. The issue of whether it's a positive inheritance or a negative inheritance is not really relevant here. What's important is that Hawthorne is an important part of Salem history, and again, this is the basis of Hawthorne's connection to this land. On slide 5, we have an artistic rendering of an actual embroidered scarlet letter A, and you may have wondered when you were reading The Custom House, when Hawthorne talks about going into a particular room in the Custom House and he finds some old archives, he's going through them and he finds an envelope. Within the envelope is an actual embroidered scarlet letter, and then he says he finds some documents talking about the real Hester Prynne and all the events that he ultimately turns into the novel The Scarlet Letter, as if The Scarlet Letter were a nonfiction biography of real people rather than a fictional novel. You may have wondered how much truth was behind this, considering that the rest of the Custom House really was autobiographical and based on truth. Well, in fact, he did make this part up. He did not find an actual scarlet letter or documents. There was no real Hester Prynne. So this is kind of interesting because, again, in Romanticism, writers are more likely to play these kinds of mind games with their readers. This is a moment where he is being intentionally an unreliable narrator. And it's funny, if you go back to the text and look, he says that finding these documents is a way to verify the authenticity of this story. But it's absolutely not true. And again, we can make the contrast here. He is lying to us for the sake of entertainment. It's not malicious, but he is telling a fib. Again, contrast this to the Equiana reading and the Franklin reading, where those two authors are really working hard to try to insist to the reader that they are sincere, honest writers, that they are trying to talk about the world in an authentic way. Hawthorne makes those claims, but it really isn't true. He has made this up. Here on slide 6, I'd like to turn again to Hawthorne's description of his firing from the Custom House. And he calls it a decapitation, decapitation meaning the removal of one's head from one's body, like an execution. And he says that the novel, The Scarlet Letter, may actually be called The Posthumous Papers of a Decapitated Surveyor. Posthumous means written after his death. He says that the gloominess of The Scarlet Letter may actually be, quote, due to the period of hardly accomplished revolution and still seething turmoil with which the story shaped itself. So again, this revolution he's talking about isn't really a revolution. It's merely a change in the presidential administration. Again, in 1848, Zachary Taylor from the opposing Whig Party was elected president. And so this led to, anyone who's a Democrat in a government job, I mean, not across the board, but some people were thrown out of those jobs so that people from the winning party, the Whigs, would be installed into those jobs. And again, Hawthorne took this very hard. He took it hard not necessarily because he loved the job of surveyor so much, but he did see it as a kind of political problem. And when he calls it a decapitation, he's comparing this to a kind of political violence. Now, again, using this revolution metaphor, of course, in the French Revolution in the late 1700s, people were executed for political reasons, and here we have an image of the guillotine. We have an image of probably a political prisoner being executed in the name of the ideals of the revolution. And it's very grisly and it's very depressing. Again, if you think about the ideals of, the Enlightenment and how that really was turned on its head by the political violence of revolution. But it's also interesting, again, that Hawthorne describes this firing, this rather minor event, as a decapitation. And you might also wonder, what does this have to do with the Scarlet Letter? Why is this preoccupation with his own firing? How does that set up the story of Hester Prynne? So I'd like to shed a little more light on that by turning to our next slide. Now here on slide 7 we have an image from the French Revolution. This is Marie Antoinette, who is the Queen of France. She's being led to the guillotine in France in 1793. And so we have this image of a woman who is going to be executed again under the idea of the ideals of the French Revolution. And we see that she is surrounded on the platform by a mob of people who are shaming her and very interested in witnessing her bloody death. Moving on to slide 8, we have another image of a woman on a scaffold. Here is our Hester Prynne, actually 2 images. On the right is an illustration from an 1878 version of the Scarlet Letter, and on the left we have a movie still from a 1926 silent movie version. But you see that the picture is pretty much the same, and it's pretty much exactly as Hawthorne describes it in his book. We have Hester on a platform. She's holding her child, and she is being stared at and judged by the mob below. And in both pictures, you actually see in the background there are weapons, there are spikes, there are pikes. So this is, even though Hester is not being actually executed here, there is the threat of violence. There is, the shame is perhaps the actual violence that's taking place, but it's very similar to that image of Marie Antoinette on the platform. And in fact, from the French Revolution, there are many images of people going to their deaths on the scaffold and having their heads chopped off and being judged by the mob. And here is where we might start to see the connection between Hester Prynne and Hawthorne and his description of this kind of political firing as a decapitation and the change in administration as a revolution. Hester, of course, is not dealing in a revolutionary situation either, but the political violence is very similarly constructed. In all of these cases, we have communities that are based on certain ideals and traditions, and so what's happening is when someone breaks with those ideals or with the established order, when someone stands out as different, they are going to be metaphorically executed. They are going to at least be held up to shame. And so if Hawthorne describes what happened to him as a decapitation, really it's perhaps more of a great sense of shame that he's feeling. And again, through no actual wrongdoing on his part, he's different. He's from the wrong party. He's from a different he's different from the new established order, and so all of these people are in some sense metaphorically being executed for who they are. Moving on to slide 9, let's talk a little bit about Pearl. Pearl is a very strange creature, as you may have gathered at this point. On the one hand, she hasn't done anything wrong. She is innocent even if she exists because of Hester's sin. On the other hand, the child does seem strange, and Hester sometimes seems afraid of her. There is some question of whether she is a devil child. On page 500, we get a little more insight into what Pearl's problem is. We can read, the child could not be made amenable to rules. In other words, Pearl is a lawbreaker. She doesn't like rules. She doesn't like to be told what to do. Continuing on, it says, the warfare of Hester's spirit was perpetuated in Pearl. So we know Hester herself was a lawbreaker. That's why she is where she is. But look, the warfare of Hester's spirit. So again, we kind of get this revolutionary metaphor being carried out. Hester is a lawbreaker, but just not just a lawbreaker. She's a warrior in some way. She's a fighter, and in that sense, Pearl is also a fighter. We also need to consider, too, that Pearl is the flesh and blood evidence of Hester's lawbreaking, of her sin. And this is a problem. I mean, we have that opening scene where she is not just on the scaffold by herself, she's carrying her child. And consider, Hester, she committed adultery. Her husband had been gone for years. Her husband is Roger Chillingworth. He's been missing for years. No one knows where he is. He could be dead. And then Hester suddenly gets pregnant. So obviously she's been playing around. She's done something wrong. She doesn't give up who her lover is. But it is because of the pregnancy that she is caught. She could have gotten away with it if she hadn't been pregnant. Pearl is the evidence for her wrongdoing and the reason why she is shamed. It's not to say that no one else in that community ever played around, but they weren't caught. They can keep it a secret. Pearl is the reason why the secret is given away. She is the externalization of the sin, much as the Scarlet Letter A is the externalization of the sin. She can't keep it inside as a secret. She must wear it on her chest. And so Pearl, dressed here in red, is in a sense another kind of Scarlet Letter. She is this external telling of the secret. And we can imagine the great burden that would put on Pearl. Her mother, of course, loves her very much, but you can understand why Hester might feel ambivalent toward her child. But it's interesting here, too, how Hawthorne talks about Pearl as having inherited this warlike spirit from her mother, as if it were transmitted by blood. Now, we can imagine that Pearl's growing up in this very isolated environment. She was born in a prison, and she has no friends. She's living alone with her mother, who also has no real friends. You can imagine what a strange situation that would be for Pearl, and it would be understandable why Pearl would grow up to be so odd. But that's not how Hawthorne describes it. He doesn't say that Pearl was raised in a way that makes her a lawbreaker. She has inherited this birthright through her flesh, her blood, her body, her spirit from Hester. So again, this romantic idea, this isn't some kind of choice that Pearl is making. This is something that this is a weight that she carries, a legacy that she carries, regardless of whether she likes it or not. On slide 10, we have a painting of Hester walking through the village with her daughter, and we see a group of children who are taunting Hester, and some people in the background as well, giving the side eye to Hester. And as we know from the book, Hawthorne says that when Pearl sees these children making fun of her mother, she gets very angry. She throws stones at them. She rages. We have to take seriously the effect of isolation on Pearl and on Hester. At least Hester, though, there's a reason why she's been that justifies her isolation from the community, even if it seems unfair. There at least was a reason. Imagine how this is for Pearl, this innocent child, and she is having to deal with her mother being shunned and herself being shunned. Again, even though this community seems very unforgiving and cruel, Hawthorne seems to be saying that one needs to be part of a community in order to have a normal life or a good life. The fact that they are isolated from any community is a problem. and to be friendless, and in Pearl's case also to be fatherless. This blood connection to her heritage, she has Hester, but she's missing her father. She is cut off from this community, so she is isolated by their attitude, and she also is missing the half of her blood connection, and this seems to be perhaps perpetuating her anger and her loneliness and her problematic personality. Here on slide 11, let's talk a little bit more about Arthur Dimmesdale and Roger Chillingworth. Of course, Arthur Dimmesdale is our sensitive young minister, and by now we understand that he is the father of Pearl. He is the sinner who committed adultery with Hester. And Roger Chillingworth is her husband, who was missing for so long. In the opening scene, when she's standing on the scaffold, the stranger who walks into town with an Indian, and he's in disguise, is Chillingworth. So he sees right off the bat what has happened, and he sees a daughter that is not his, and it's very upsetting for him. But notice he doesn't give himself away. In fact, he visits Hester in the prison under the guise of being a physician, and he is a physician. He is someone who has learned Indian medicine, and so he goes, and she of course recognizes him, and he's upset, but he doesn't want to punish her. He understands that the Scarlet Letter A is punishment enough, but what he does say is he wants her to keep his secret. So Chillingworth is a man with a secret. He does not want to be exposed as her husband. And why? Well, on the one hand, he understands that there would be a shame that he would receive. He would have the embarrassment of having had a wife who cheated on him and had a child who that is not his. But there's also another reason. Chillingworth wants to stay undercover. He wants to find out who the lover is, the secret lover of Hester, who she is not giving up. Well, Dimmesdale, of course, is a very respected minister in the community, and he's not giving it up as well, and he feels very guilty about it. Throughout this novel, we're seeing him grasping his heart as if his heart is in pain, and he is just completely plagued by this guilt, and in fact, it brings him so low that throughout the novel, he seems that he's almost at death's door because this pain is so tearing him apart. Roger Chillingworth is an interesting character because, on the one hand, he's innocent in as much as he hasn't done anything wrong, and yet he seems so evil. The revenge that he's carrying is tearing him apart, and it's making him uglier and more vile. And ultimately, as we discover, he figures out Arthur Dimmesdale's secret, but he doesn't come out and say, "I've discovered that you are the lover." He says he decides to keep that secret so he can continue to torture Dimmesdale. He understands that Dimmesdale feels guilty, and so he is going to work on Dimmesdale's conscience and make him feel worse. And so we have this question that's coming up in the novel: which is worse, Dimmesdale's sin or Chillingworth's obsession with revenge? And we also have to think too about what is going on with the secrets versus the openly committed crime, or at least the crime that's been found out. Both of these men tell Hester that at some level she is better off that she was discovered. In a sense, Pearl was a good thing because now that she's been shamed by the community, she doesn't have to hold it inside anymore. The pain has been externalized. The guilt has been admitted. And so now she can kind of move on with her life, even though the community is not letting her forget it. It is something that is not going to tear her apart psychologically in the same way that keeping the secret is tearing apart these men. So, in a sense, these men are privileged. They don't have to give up their secret, and so they have the privilege of not being shamed by the community. But on the other hand, is that secret really a curse? Is it actually worse to have that shame put out before the community, or is it worse to have to hold that guilt inside? Now, one kind of interesting characteristic about both Chillingworth and Dimmesdale that I'm going to point out here on slide 12 is that both of these men are book lovers. Chillingworth, of course, is a person who loves books. We when Hester describes him, having met him in Europe, we see that he's always reading. He's poring through books of old lore. He's kind of an introverted intellectual man, and Dimmesdale also loves books. And he, of course, he's a man of the book. He's a minister. And it's interesting, Chillingworth, as a lover of books, is a very good reader. And it's not just books that he can read. He can read Dimmesdale's heart. Without having any actual true evidence, he hones in on Dimmesdale rather quickly, and he figures out that Dimmesdale is the lover. We have that scene where Chillingworth is at Dimmesdale's home, and Dimmesdale falls asleep on a chair. Chillingworth goes to him, and he notices again that Dimmesdale is always clutching his heart. Well, Chillingworth walks over to Dimmesdale and opens the top part of his robe, and he reads something. He sees something on Dimmesdale's chest. Now, Hawthorne doesn't tell us what he's seen, but we see in that scene that Chillingworth is very excited. He reads something. He sees something. He can read Dimmesdale's heart, and this confirms for him that Dimmesdale is, in fact, the secret lover. Dimmesdale is not such a good reader, is he? He doesn't figure out that Chillingworth is Hester's husband, but he doesn't even completely get that Chillingworth is out to get him. He understands that there's something evil about Chillingworth, and he's afraid of him, yet he doesn't throw Chillingworth out. He keeps him around. So we might want to think about that. Why does Dimmesdale keep him around? What exactly is going on with their relationship? We might also want to think a little more about other references to books and to readers in this novel. Pearl, of course, loves to read. She loves to read the Scarlet Letter A. And of course, again, the Scarlet Letter is something that is read, literally read, on Hester's chest, and supposedly it tells us, or tells the community, something about Hester. Pearl is very interested in the A, and she asks her mother repeatedly, what does that A mean? What does that A mean? And her mother won't say. Pearl hopes to one day have an A on her own chest, so she can be read as well. Kind of a funny moment in the book. But Pearl is also very interested in this tale of the quote-unquote the black man, who it's another name for Satan. And the lore in this community about Satan is that Satan is a man who carries a large book. And in the book are the names of people. Those names are written in blood, and those are the people whose souls are damned. People come into the forest to meet with Satan, and they write their names in their blood into Satan's book, and that's how we know Satan has their souls. So it's kind of a very spooky story, but it's interesting that the marker of their damnation is something that is written in a book. And of course we can also think of the Day of Judgment and God's own book and the names of the people who would be in God's book. So books are playing an important role, and reading is playing an important role in this novel. And we can also think too of the moment where Pearl mistakes Chillingworth for Satan. She says, well, he's a man dressed in dark robes and he carries a big book, so perhaps that is Satan. And of course the joke here is Chillingworth really is kind of an evil man, and so in a way he is satanic. Pearl seems to be a very good reader, and so that's something we want to watch out for in this novel as well. She likes to read words and letters and perhaps books, but she also reads people. She has this kind of preternatural sense for such a young child of being able to figure out people. On slide 13, I'd like to talk a little about the forest and a little bit about what the forest means in this novel. Again, in Romanticism, the forest is an important place. It's the scene of nature. It is the place that is not the town, not the urban center where a lot of people live. Nature is removed from people. And in that sense, the forest can be considered as an idyllic place, as a place of beauty, as a place where people can escape the pressures of the community. And at the same time, though, especially here, the forest can also be a place where evil is occurring. It's a scene of freedom, but that freedom again seems to be a bit of a problem in this book. It's escape from the town, but it's also isolation from the town. It's privacy, so it's a place where Dimmesdale and Hester can finally talk to each other openly and truthfully. They don't have to hide from the shaming eyes of the people in the town. And yet, again, the forest is also the place where Satan is going and meeting with his followers, and where Mistress Hibbins wants to go in the middle of the night and do her practice her witchcraft. So, again, we might want to think about this. The forest is on the one hand this kind of positive thing, and on the other hand, it's perhaps a negative thing. And so we get this ambivalent view of nature in these scenes. On slide 14, I've put another image of the forest. This, of course, is an image from The Last of the Mohicans, the section that we read a couple of weeks ago from James Fenimore Cooper's novel. And in that case, again, we can consider Cooper a romantic as well. He had a more positive view of the forest, it seemed. We saw that moment where Natty Bumppo is speaking with his Indian friend Chingachgook. They're having kind of a philosophical discussion. And the forest is this place where these two men can be real men. They're going to hunt in the forest. They are connected to nature. It is a place where, it seems pretty positive. And it is also a place that is particularly associated with the Native American Indian. Chingachgook is someone who would have been raised to understand the forest very well. Natty Bumppo comes to learn more about the forest, but it is, Indians are often, again, in these older books, very much tied to nature. They're associated with nature. Now, of course, Chillingworth had lived with the Indians for quite a while, and his new occupation is as a physician, and specifically a physician who understands nature very well enough to make natural herbal medicines. So this seems to be a positive thing. Chillingworth's new connection with nature that he's gained from living with the Indians for so long has made him useful to the Puritan community. He can save people's lives or heal them. At the same time, Chillingworth is this kind of evil person, and we have to wonder, his association with the forest on the one hand has brought him something positive, but it may also have instilled in him perhaps more of a tendency to evil as well. So we might think about that even in Chillingworth. What is nature? What is his connection to the forest doing to him? On slide 15, we have an image of that wonderful scene where Dimmesdale has gone, moved by his guilt and shame, to the scaffold in the middle of the night. He stands on the scaffold as he had not done when Hester had to stand in front of the community on the scaffold. He goes to the scaffold and stands there, and then Hester and Pearl are coming through the town, as it turns out, coincidentally. In the middle of the night, they're returning from having attended the governor's death, or his deathbed, and she sees him on the scaffold, and she joins him, and the family is reunited here on the scaffold. We might want to wonder, why does Dimmesdale what is he getting out of standing on that scaffold? What is that bringing him? And at the same time, we notice, Pearl insists, she says, "Won't you come and stand with us on the scaffold at noon tomorrow?" And he refuses. So this is interesting. Dimmesdale, on the one hand, wants to do this symbolic measure of standing on the scaffold, but he refuses to do it in front of other people. So we might think about that. Why is Dimmesdale wanting to stand on the scaffold, and why is Pearl insisting that he does it in front of other people where it actually would matter? Again, we might think about this as Pearl's ability to read people. She seems to understand that Dimmesdale has a secret that he needs to let out, and not just let out symbolically, but let out for real in front of the community. It's not entirely clear if Pearl understands that he is her father, but she certainly seems to have some kind of connection to him that she understands. Slide 16, we have an image of a movie still from that 1926 silent film. And I thought this was interesting because as the viewer of this movie, we are seeing an audience looking back at us. Of course, this is an image of the town staring at Hester, shaming her with their eyes. And what's kind of interesting about this notion of the shaming eyes of the audience is that it anticipates the larger problem of the gaze of the other as inherently shameful. This is a theme that's going to actually become important in the late 1800s and through the mid-1900s in existential philosophy. The idea that just the fact that another human being exists in the world who can look at you as an object is creating this kind of existential shame in us. It's a problem. It creates a crisis in us, a psychological crisis. So we don't even need to be being judged for a crime we've committed. The crime we've committed is being a human being and an object, as such a flesh and blood object in the world, rather than just this kind of this completely free consciousness that views others. To be viewed is to be shamed. And Hawthorne anticipates this on an even deeper level when he goes into this kind of long conversation starting around page 541. He says, Hester, quote, assumed a freedom of speculation. Now think about the word speculation. On the one hand, speculation is a kind of theorizing, a kind of a freedom to theorize. For example, if I'm speculating about a missing airplane and I'm trying to think about where did that airplane go, and I have no actual evidence about what happened to this missing airplane, but I will speculate about it. I will come up with theories. Those theories may be wild. They may be as wild as my imagination takes me. So it is speculation is a kind of freedom. It's a kind of intellectual freedom. It's not bound by anything in the world. I can really just come up with any guess that I like. But the word speculation is also tied to vision. Spectacles, of course. A spectacle is something that is very exciting to see. A pair of spectacles is a pair of glasses. They help us see better. So speculation ties together both viewing something, the ability to view something, and the ability to think freely about something. Moving on to slide 17, this issue about the freedom to come up with a theory about something and to be intellectually free brings us to a deeper issue going on in this novel, which again we started talking about with Hawthorne, talking about revolution and decapitation in the custom house, and moving on to this image of Hester on the scaffold as if she were a victim of a revolution. We might ask, is Hester herself a radical revolutionary? Take a look at page 540 to 541. Hawthorne says, the world's law was no law for her mind. So it's not just that Hester is a lawbreaker. She is a lawbreaker in terms of adultery, what she did with her body. She's a lawbreaker for what she thinks. She is insisting on this freedom, on this breaking the laws of the world's laws over her mind. It says, it was an age in which the human intellect, newly emancipated, had taken a more active and a wider range than for many centuries before. So this isn't even an issue of just Hester being a revolutionary. This revolutionary spirit that she has is coming from a larger world in which the age of revolution is coming, and people's minds are being freed from the boundaries of tradition, past tradition. So this is a very intellectual freedom. Men of the sword had overthrown nobles and kings. Again, political violence, the violence of revolutionaries overthrowing the old order. Hester Prynne imbibed this spirit. She assumed a freedom of speculation then common enough on the other side of the Atlantic, in other words, referring to the great many revolutions that were happening in Europe, but which our forefathers, had they known of it, would have held it to be a deadlier crime than that stigmatized by the Scarlet Letter. In other words, the real problem that the Puritan community is having is adultery is one thing, but it's not really the issue of adultery that really threatens the Puritan community. What threatens the Puritan community is the idea that people are going to start getting ideas of their own and think about the world in a different way than what they have already set down in stone. On slide 18, we continue. On page 541, Hawthorne says, "Everything was against her. The world was hostile. A tendency to speculation, though it may keep a woman quiet, as it does a man, yet makes her sad. She discerns, it may be, such a hopeless task before her. As a first step, the whole system of society is to be torn down and built up anew." The Scarlet Letter had not done its office. Okay, so the despair that Hester is feeling is, again, not so much about the consequences of her being caught for adultery. The issue here is that she's this very intellectually free person, and she imagines a way to tear down society and build it up again in a way that suits her better. And this is a very revolutionary idea. She's imagining that she is the best arbiter of her world. She is a person who can make the best decisions about the world she wants to live in. And that is revolutionary, but it is also violent. She wants to tear down the society. And again, you can imagine why the Puritans would be more threatened by that kind of intellectual freedom. Their community is so based on this adherence to an order that has been passed down for them, from the Bible, from hundreds of years. And so to imagine tearing down that society is much more threatening to them. It threatens to overthrow their social stability. And so that's the bigger issue. And so when Hawthorne says the Scarlet Letter had not done its office, it hadn't done its job, what it's saying is the Scarlet Letter isn't just merely a punishment for adultery. The Scarlet Letter's job is to force Hester to get back in line, to get her to accept this society on its terms rather than on her terms, that she needs to submit to this order. And it's interesting because, again, the Scarlet Letter, is Hawthorne saying that this is a good thing, that she should get in line? On the one hand, he's suggesting that her isolation from the community is a problem. And it's bad for her, and she should be connected to a community. And on the other hand, to be connected to that community is to submit to its order, which is sometimes cruel. It's not how she would necessarily want things to be. So this is the decision that's before us. Do we want to be free at the expense of having a social order that we can depend on and feel connected to? Slide 19, on pages 558 to 59, we have the quote from Hester talking to Dimmesdale. Dimmesdale is, of course, very upset. He's in the forest and he's just miserable about the way his life is going. And Hester finally says he needs to leave the community as well. She says, "Leave this wreck and ruin here where it hath happened. Meddle no more with it. Begin all anew. Hast thou exhausted possibility in the failure of this one trial? Not so. The future is yet full of trial and success. There is happiness to be enjoyed. There is good to be done. Preach, write, act, do anything save to lie down and die. Up and away." Again, a very hopeful moment for Hester, and we have this moment where she seems very strong and very outspoken. She's finally speaking loud what's on her mind and in her heart. And it's a very revolutionary kind of speech. On the left, I've put an image from the French Revolution. Translated, it is indivisible unity of the Republic, that would be the Republic of France, liberty, which is freedom, equality, fraternity, which is brotherhood, or death. In other words, liberty or death, words also spoken by Patrick Henry here in Richmond. And so again, it's a very revolutionary slogan: give me liberty or give me death. And that's what Hester seems to be saying. She says, if you don't leave this place, you're not going to be free, and you should begin anew. Leave this society, isolate yourself from it, go to Europe, go back to Europe, start over again. Leave this behind. And by the way, look in this image. At the top of the image, you'll see a red hat. That's a scarlet cap, and that was a symbol of the French Revolution. I'm not exactly sure if the Scarlet Letter is supposed to be so tied to this scarlet cap, but it does. There seems to be, there could be a connection. It is the symbol of revolution. But so the question then really is, is the moral of the story give me liberty or give me death? Because on the other hand, Hester seems to be living a social death. She wants to hold on to this freedom, but if only she would submit to the community, she would have a social life. The question here is, can Dimmesdale leave this community? Can he really begin anew, or is his life in this community? And that's what we're going to want to really pay attention to, how this all kind of ends up in the second half of the Scarlet Letter. Well, we've reached the last slide, slide 20, and I hope this presentation has been helpful for you. I hope you're also enjoying reading the Scarlet Letter. You may find it easier to read than some of the previous readings that we've had. The language is a little more modern, the story is a little sexier, maybe a little more interesting. And the Scarlet Letter, of course, has been very influential in our own culture, in our own popular culture. We have a movie poster here on this slide of the 1926 version of the Scarlet Letter. Lillian Gish was a huge silent film star at the time. It was a big deal. On the left, we have a picture of the 1995 version of the Scarlet Letter. Demi Moore played Hester. Gary Oldman played Dimmesdale. And then more recently, we had the teenage film Easy A, starring Emma Stone. This is much more loosely based on the Scarlet Letter, but it is important to that. It's a teen comedy, but it is important to that. Emma Stone's character specifically references the Scarlet Letter, and of course here we have an image of her where she has actually applied a Scarlet Letter A to her bustier. I will see you all in Monday's class. Thanks for listening.